Trust Bitesize Podcast, brought to you by the Premier League Primary Stars team, where we speak to practitioners from the education and football world and discuss ways we can have a positive impact on the primary PE landscape. For our first guest, we're delighted to welcome Sarah Creegan from Lightbulb Moments Consultancy, who's going to talk to us about the very important topic of mental health in primary schools and PE.
Okay, so just introducing myself, my name's Phil. I'm part of the Primary Stars team. We just had Chris who's in to introduce us as well. So we'll be going back and forth between ourselves and Sarah as part of today's podcast. So Sarah, welcome. Thank you for giving up your time today to come and have a chat with us. How's everything been for you?
Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me. Really excited to be part of this first podcast. Also, just to say, it's got me out of taking my car for a service. My husband's done that on my behalf this afternoon, so it's a win-win for me. Thank you very much. It's the small wins during lockdown, isn't it, that we appreciate?
Definitely. I was speaking to a good friend of mine, and she said that during this lockdown time, all this family time we've had, we'll never ever get it again. So there's small little things which you do appreciate, which has been really, really, really good in many respects, considering the grand scheme of things and what's happened. So how's it been for you? Have you been keeping active? Been keeping busy?
Yeah, I have. I've been much busier than I thought I would, actually. So all the people who said this was going to be about sitting on the sofa and watching Netflix, I'm still waiting for that to crop up. But it's been really good. So as you know, Phil, I support in a lot of schools. I also support lots of other organisations, and obviously at the moment, in terms of mental health and well-being, there's been quite a lot of anxiety and a few worries about this, so it's been good to be able to support people at this time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, myself and Chris were discussing earlier, kind of pre-COVID, when we were still working within the school setting, that majority of the children that we work with were doing really, really well. Their coping mechanisms were very, very good. The one thing I found personally, and I'm not sure on your experiences on there, but sometimes it's that resilience and the ability to bounce back is sometimes I've personally found that some children have struggled with, and it's our job's been trying to help them develop those skills and help them get a little bit better. And especially kind of during this COVID time, this period, it's been even more important just to look at those life skills and help them develop it kind of even further than what we'd already do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's been a lot said around how we need to close the academic gaps for children, which obviously some children will have fallen further behind during this time, but like you say, it's the life skills at the moment, it's the coping, it's the resilience. Unless children are happy and feel safe and secure in schools, they're not going to be in the right place to learn some of the academic stuff that we need them to catch up with anyway. So I think it's really important about getting that balance. Of course, we have to close those gaps, but we have to make sure that the situation is right for the children to be able to do that.
Exactly, I completely agree. And it kind of leads on to our podcast topic today, because we're going to be talking about kind of post-COVID and when the children return to school in September, and what we can do to support those children in making sure that they are having the best environment possible around them. So I'm going to hand back to Chris, who's going to introduce hopefully the slide which people should be able to see.
Yeah, so thanks for that introduction, Phil, and Sarah, thanks for that. I'm just going to share the document that you've sent over to us, which we've all had a read through and looks fantastic. First of all, do you want to just sort of give us a bit of a brief introduction of yourself, Sarah, and what sort of things you do for those who aren't already aware?
Yeah, so I will say, to start off with, I'm not claiming to be a mental health or wellbeing expert. What I do have is 26 years experience in the education sector, primarily in primary schools. So I think I've done just about every job in the primary school. Social secretary was probably the hardest, because if you splash out the cash, you never get it back from everybody else. I've been deputy head, I've been the Senko, I've been the inclusion coordinator, and I was a head for 5 years. About 3.5 years ago, I decided that I was worried enough about some of the pressures of education on children, young people and the staff to have a bit of a drum to bang. So I decided to stop being a head teacher and to set up my own business. And so that's what I do now. I go around supporting people, supporting schools and predominantly sporting organisations to help young people with their mental health and wellbeing. So I am a mental health first aider. And the reason that I work closely with sporting organisations is that I am a very big sports fan myself, watching, not so much doing.
Fantastic. Well, I think that sort of fits in perfectly with what we're trying to do. I mean, the idea of this is just to try and just help any sort of teacher that comes across this and hopefully relate it to all their practice, but specifically within a PE lesson. That's what we're trying to achieve here. So hopefully you'll be able to do that for us.
So,
can you see the document all right, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I'll leave it to you to sort of talk us through it, Sarah.
Okay, so if you can go on to the next slide, that would be brilliant. Thank you very much. So I guess this comes with a little bit of a kind of pre-warning, just in terms of our own thinking of as adults around the children, stuff that we might have read in the press or kind of our own personal experiences of having children at home. Just not to make assumptions at this point in time about the experience that the kids might have had during this past 100 weeks or however long it's been that we've been locked down. So, for example, as I say, I have been supporting a lot of families, and I spoke to parents the other day of 2 autistic boys that I really thought would struggle during this time of being away from school. And actually, they said that they flourished. They've been able to lead their own learning. They've been able to do a lot of research on their personal interests, their special interests. They produced far more work than they ordinarily would in school. Because they haven't had that social expectation put on them at the moment. So they've really enjoyed it. Now, I know coming back that things might be a little bit trickier for them, because obviously they do need to be more sociable with their peers and things. But actually, it's good that they've had a really positive experience. I think the other groups I was thinking about when I was putting this together, as Phil knows, higher achievers are a big group that I'm concerned about. The kids who've flown through school, maybe not found things very tricky, who then maybe when they come across a challenge have a bit of a meltdown sometimes. And if they've been at home with parents who've kind of reinforced that fixed mindset a little bit for them, who maybe have praised their outcome rather than the process and the effort, they're going to come back still kind of really looking at themselves as being competitive with that fixed mindset, not that growth mindset to learn more. And I guess the other kind of area that I was thinking about was the children who before lockdown maybe got to the bottom of a page and said, I've got to the bottom of the page, what do I do now? Or I haven't got a pencil, what do I do? Actually, during lockdown, if they've been overly supported by parents to not have to think for themselves, to not to be independent, then they're going to come back with fewer of those life skills that we were talking about. So I guess don't make assumptions, but just, it's about asking questions. It's about finding out what everybody's different experiences were, and just kind of in those first couple of weeks getting a measure of who needs what. Yeah,
no, definitely. I think it's especially in regard to mental health, but with everything, we're always trying to sort of treat everybody as an individual. And I think this is just going to compound that. Everyone's experience is going to be so different. Everyone's parents, they'll all have the best intentions, you would hope, but they're going to have different ways of doing that. Every school has had varying degrees of success with their home learning, and how they've been able to support everyone, I think has been a real challenge. So it'd be really challenging for us to sort of try and be aware of everyone as an individual. So that's a really interesting point. Should we move it on to the next part? Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so this is really kind of, obviously we've only got sort of 20 minutes or so, so I was trying to think of a top tip, something that people can take away with them. And even if schools are already on this journey, I think it's hopefully a timely reminder of how important getting children to think about their thinking and regulate their emotions is going to be come September. So for anybody who doesn't know about the Education Endowment Foundation, they are a charity that support research in schools, predominantly to close the gap between children with a lower family income and their peers. But actually the research that they do, it helps everybody. And one of the kind of the most successful strategies as teachers that they've proven with very secure evidence is around this metacognition and self-regulated learning. It's up there at the moment with giving good feedback. So I've just taken a screenshot. They're probably quite blurry, but I've taken a screenshot of the kind of documents that you can access on there, but there are others. There's a school audit tool that you can access on there if you want to. There's also an early years assessment of skills for the little ones coming in. But just to say that, I'm going to talk through it, but in terms of trying to do a whole school strategy, as we said, we try to bespoke our support for individual children, but actually this will work for all of them. It's low cost, so that's always a bonus. It's based on secure evidence, and from the research that the EEF have done, it accelerates progress by 7 months, which by my reckoning should just about cover from the moment that we lock down to September.
That's that's a good coincidence, really. So hopefully that's something that a lot of schools will start to look into. Do you think that they're going to be looking at something to specifically deal with the effects of COVID? Is that sort of the next level for them, do you think, and for practitioners like yourself?
In terms of catch up, do you mean?
Yeah, just something more sort of specifically tailored in relation to the COVID, or is it all just, is it good principles that you can just try and apply generally?
So the government they've announced some additional funding for catch-up programs, but that's going to be very kind of subject specific, I guess, and I presume kind of maths and English based. I mean, it will be down to schools to decide what they do, but so that's available. But I think, as you say, this is about the good principles, the good practice that we do every day anyway. This is a reminder. This is not rocket science, but it's the good principles that we have. And actually, as we say, it's to support that subject knowledge, to support that learning that we do. It's to underpin it. And these, once the children understand this kind of way of working, it will help them to be successful throughout their teenage years, throughout their adulthood.
I think that you mentioned a really good point there that really struck a chord with me, which is that actually, although this is the sort of research that underpins it, actually a lot of the stuff that is within this is stuff that people are already doing, that lots of teachers do as a matter of course, but this is just sort of gives a bit more detail, a little bit more depth, which I think is really important. Okay, so just to remind people, or if people are new to it, to help them understand what self-regulated learning is, it's basically made up of 3 components. So the bottom left is the cognitions. That's all those great, it's the bread and butter of teaching, really. It's giving children strategy, or them developing strategies such as memorization and recall, and it's giving them subject-specific knowledge and skills. And as I say, that's kind of the basics that we all do hopefully well. Then there's the metacognition, and that is helping children to think about their thinking. We know that the most successful learners, the most resilient learners, are the ones who can make links between their learning, who can reflect on what went well and what didn't go so well, and make changes as opposed to doing the same thing over and over again. So we're going to talk a lot about metacognition in the next however long we've got. And then the motivation is really about people's willingness to have a go. So understanding that something might be tricky today and it might be worrying me today, but if I almost bite the bullet and have a go and accept some help and accept I'm going to make some mistakes, then tomorrow things will be easier for me. And it's that kind of process. So it's talking about people's interest and willingness. Excellent. It all seems to fit in really well with the stuff I sort of don't claim to be any sort of expert, but with the stuff that sort of links into obviously resilience and the growth mindset, I know is really big in primary schools and secondary schools as well. So I think that builds
this
in.
dovetails with growth mindset.
Yeah, it's all linked in, which is fantastic.
Okay, so this is the Learning Pit. It was designed by a man called James Nottingham, and that's my own attempt at an image. But there are lots of other images at the push of a search engine button if people want to find them to display in their classrooms. And I think, this is something that at my school we used to talk to the children about a lot to help them to understand the learning process. So, when we're faced with a challenge, when we're faced with a tricky situation, we have various different choices. So it might be that we set the challenge ourselves, that we're really interested in kind of being out of our comfort zone and learning something new. And in that case, we might dive headfirst into the learning pit. We're motivated, we're keen to do something different. More often than not, we don't dive into the learning pit as children or as adults. We, at best case scenario, maybe somebody nudges us in gently and kindly, and that would be probably the preference. So we're slightly out of our comfort zone, and sometimes we get shoved in, and I think coronavirus has shoved us all in the learning pit over the last few months. So we've all been faced with the challenge, but it's then understanding what our options are as we go through that. So go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think very much so. I can see the sort of the first initial drop into the pit is probably the point at which we're at now for a lot of people. There's a lot of unknowns still, and that's going to be the challenge, getting everyone into that having a go sort of stage of it. I suppose once you're getting further along, you're starting to see the benefits. So it's that first sort of stage I can see being a big challenge.
And I think if we talk to children about this and say, right, okay, so we're going to do this, or you're going to do this, that's where we're at. So what kind of things do you need to think about? What do you need to have a go? So, we can talk, children understand things like procrastination and delaying tactics and things like that. So, right, okay, how do we get going? What's going to make us get going and just bite the bullet? What do we know from before that we could use today that might be helpful? So it's asking them all those great questions to get them started and to get them interested and hooked in, because that's really, really important. Obviously, if it's something that they're not interested in or they don't see the purpose of, then that's tricky. Can I just also say as well, with the learning pit, when we're explicitly teaching this, the children already need to have the subject knowledge that you're going to be teaching the challenge around, because otherwise it's overload for them. They can't be learning something new around the subject and then working out how to get through the learning pit as well. So then obviously we need to talk to them about their problem solving. How do they solve problems? What is it that they do to solve a problem? Is it that they break it down into little chunks, which is a really good thing to do? We know that if you set yourself one huge goal, the dopamine reward that you get comes right at the end of something. So your brain releases neurotransmitters, it releases dopamine, which is the reward chemical. Whereas if you set yourselves tiny little problems to solve as you go along, little milestones, little landmarks to get to that big goal, then you constantly get that high five and well done from your brain. We need to talk to them also about kind of, if you're if you're stuck on a problem or something like that, do you need somebody else to help you? Do you need to do a bit of Googling? What else can you do? And also remind them that this is not just a straightforward romp through the learning pit. So it might be that you get stuck at the first stage for a while. It might be that you think you're nearly out and then you slip back in. And that's when we need to be really resilient and carry on with those coping skills. And then the final bit of the learning pit is something that we just don't tend to do as much as we should as adults or as children. Life's so busy that if we have success, then we just tend to move on to the next thing. We don't reflect on it. And it's really, really important to teach them how to reflect, because then that will automatically change the way that they think for the next time they're challenged.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think as a sort of teacher, the instinct is to almost go, excellent, they've got this, now let's move on to the next thing, let's build on that learning. And while that's sort of right, I think you really do need to sort of recognize and consolidate what they've actually just learned, what they've just done, what they've achieved, just to really help that.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay, so once they understand the basics of the learning pit, has that got a, yeah. So then we add the kind of metacognition, the 3 aspects of metacognition, if you like, that children understand. So planning, monitoring, and reflecting at the end. So this is where we can ask those really good quality questions to get children thinking about their journey. So maybe getting them to think about what, as I said, what is the goal? What is my aim? Have I done anything like this before that might help me? Have I done anything before that might hinder me in this? And you know, which bits are the most helpful? What examples have I been shown before that I can take from? Maybe what am I assuming about myself? So certainly for the older children, they might say, for example, I'm no good at maths, or something like that. What am I assuming about the task? Is it too hard? Are people saying it's too hard, I can't do it? What are we thinking here? How can we overcome that? And as I said, where do I start? And I think it's really important as well for children to understand that, you know, how am I feeling? We'll come on to this in a little while, but am I excited by this challenge? Am I worried by it? And what can I do to overcome those? But as I say, I will talk about those in a minute. Then there's the monitoring. So going on to the monitoring, so have I gone off on a tangent? And if so, is it a helpful tangent or is it not? Is the goal still clear? Am I still working towards it? Do I need to change what I'm doing? You know, again, the best learners are the people who realise actually this isn't helping me at this point in time. They don't carry on regardless. What would somebody who thinks differently to me do? There's all those kinds of questions that we need to be asking them, or getting them to start asking themselves and other children in their group. And then at the end, as I say, that reflection is really important. So did I achieve my goal? Did I get part way there? Did I, you know, which bit was harder than the others perhaps? What do I know now that I didn't know before? What worked well? What could be even better next time? If I was teaching somebody else, what would I say to them? So it's all those really open questions that get them to really think about their thinking.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I can see it sort of, as you're going through that, I can identify elements of that, certainly with my practice, but actually now that it's here, it has deeper meaning, and I can sort of reflect a little bit and think, well, actually I can do much more monitoring, and I can probably change my planning to help reflect that. So this is it's a different way of looking at it, particularly from a PE point of view. We often go initially from the sort of task itself, so this is a really interesting way to look at it for me.
Great.
Oh, here we go. Feelings.
Okay, so yeah, this is around the motivation. So the grey circle on the Venn diagram that we had earlier. So again, all to do with being interested, and opening up that wider emotional vocabulary for children, because I think there are still children in year 6 who pretty much rely on the words sad, happy or angry. As a country, we don't have as many words for emotions maybe as some other countries. So giving them those ideas, helping them to understand that if they're worried about the challenge that they're facing, what is it specifically that they're worried about and how can they overcome that? The word stress has crept into a lot of children's vocabulary in kind of recent times, and to help them to understand that actually a little bit of stress is really good for us. It kicks us up the bum and makes us do things, but obviously too much stress and then we feel overwhelmed. And if they're in that situation, what strategies do they have to calm their thinking down, to slow their brain down? Are they frustrated? And if they are, what can they use to help them, be it another person or a YouTube clip or something like that? So helping them to understand, if they're motivated, that's great. But if they're not, what is it that's holding them back and what can they do about it?
So would you say this is one of the really important parts to it is that understanding of the feelings, because that's something that I think I'm certainly guilty of it myself. You tend to sort of almost simplify it. So I've used in the past emojis to sort of represent those feelings, and although that's useful up to a point, that doesn't really give a lot of depth into those feelings and probably doesn't help the children to understand what they're feeling. Would you say that's something that we can work on?
I like an emoji. I have to say I like an emoji. I think particularly for the younger children, but I think they need the vocabulary alongside it, right, and to be able to verbalise. Now, I know for some children, if they're feeling particularly anxious or having a meltdown, that's not the time to get them to talk about their emotions. Obviously, they're just not in the right place. But I think trying to give them that vocabulary by saying, you know, earlier on I noticed that, you know, you looked, I don't know, quite embarrassed by the situation. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about that? Is that how you were feeling, or did I get it wrong? I think that would really help children to understand how they feel, because as I say, kind of with higher achievers, if they get something wrong sometimes, they get very, very embarrassed about it, because they got the fixed mindset that says that they need to look clever, and the minute that they don't, they can withdraw a bit. So it's really helpful to kind of say to them, you know, it's okay to feel like that, it's all right, but we all get things wrong, we all make mistakes. So yeah.
No, I think that could be really powerful. I think one of the big things that often causes a lot of what people call behaviour problems is probably just children not being able to verbalise how they're feeling and what they're sort of what they want to try and communicate to you. So that's really important.
Yeah.
So how might this look in the sort of context that me and sort of Phil try to specialise in, which would be that PE setting?
Yeah. Okay, so just to say that the Education Endowment Fund predominantly have done research in maths and English. They are supposed to be publishing some in different subjects around metacognition, but at the moment there isn't too much available. But there is I think a good study that was done in 2018. I'm just going to get the lady, or I presume it's a lady, Ahanasia Chatsipantelli. And I'm hoping I said that right. And if she ever sees this podcast, I apologise.
That's a great effort.
Thank you. So she did a project, a metacognitive and self-regulation project, as I say, published in 2018, whereby there was a control group that was very teacher directed in PE, and then there was another group that was less teacher directed. So in the metacognition group, the teacher did set the task up, so they'd remove that kind of level of cognitive overload, but then they let the pupils, the students, decide which level of difficulty that they wanted to go in at. And so they were able to chat to their friends, have a look at the criteria. They formed small groups if they wanted to, small supportive groups, and they chose which level of difficulty they wanted to go in at, and it actually helped them then reflect against the criteria. They were more aware of the criteria. So the control group said that they maybe did do a little bit of independent learning, but they didn't reflect because they were waiting for the teacher to feed back to them. Whereas the group that were being trialled said that they very much had a better sense of where they stood and how they were doing. So they were asked questions. So they had those planning, those monitoring, and those reflecting questions throughout the activity. And some of the results were that there was an increased self-esteem. They feel that they succeeded. They felt even that they'd succeeded on their own, and they'd had the freedom to make choices. They said that there was increased motivation. They found it more enjoyable to be able to pick and choose. It was more interesting. It was more challenging. And there were also gender differences. So the girls said that they felt they had greater control and they were less anxious about the session. Whereas the boys, it was noted, tried to pick the activity that seemed the most difficult initially because they maybe wanted to show off their abilities, but then they were more willing to try some of the other activities because it was seen as fun and all of it as a challenge, rather than just going for the one that maybe showed your sporting prowess. So I think that's the kind of thing that we can do in PE.
I was just going to share a really good example from that. Last summer when I was doing a striking and fielding unit, the very last lesson I had with them, I said, right, we've gone through all the rules, all the techniques to play a game. Now it's up to you to come up with your own variation of it. And everything you just said there, it just took me back to last summer, where I just saw the children come into a life of their own, which they could go and design those games and go and play that with them, and the freedom they had to experiment. And if it went wrong, just that little bit of prompting from me, but not stepping in too much, try and find the answer to it. And like when you just said, when they shared experiences and played the other children's games, it's completely different factor involved, and they all had smiles on their faces. And personally, I took a few new ideas from that myself. It's just great to see them being so creative with their games.
Yeah, I think you can really see when you do give them that ownership of whatever element it might be of the session, whether you give them just little tasks within it, or if you give them almost sort of complete control, you really do get that buy-in from them. They do embrace it, and you know that they're going to get more out of it if everyone is engaged, if they're involved, if it does remove that sort of little element of anxiety from some who maybe are not as confident, and maybe sort of bring the ones who are sort of very keen, as you said, to show off their prowess and sort of be the best every single time. Like, it's really interesting. The one thing that actually just made me think of is actually an English lesson. So if you get a child to copy a story that the teacher comes up with, these are the characters, this is the plot, effectively they're just copying something out, maybe adding a few different words here and there. But rather than that, if you say, make up your own story, who's your character, where's it taking place, you can imagine the sort of the children's imaginations just going wild, going here, there and everywhere. And I'd much rather have the challenge of trying to sort of relate what they're doing to our objective, rather than prescribe everything for them. I think that's much more beneficial.
I think in terms of confidence, independence and motivation, I mean, obviously when they're very little, children are motivated by a sticker or, you know, something extrinsic, but actually shuffling them towards getting that sense of pride, that sense of confidence, that sense of achievement just for themselves without a sticker or anything else, I think is really key. And again, that then changes the way that the brain feels, and it makes you want to do that more. So whatever you can do in sport, it will transfer to all of the different subjects.
Oh, definitely.
Okay, so I just thought of a little bit more of what we can do to help. I'm very aware that this is supposed to be bite-sized. I've probably gone over my limit. But just, I mean, all the good practice things that teachers know anyway, asking those open questions, modelling the thinking aloud and problem solving as teachers. It's really good to be fallible. It's really good not to know everything and to say that we don't know everything. So as a head teacher, I used to do a challenge every year that took a year, and the kids used to help me come up with it. Sometimes not the challenge that I would have chosen myself, maybe. But I could then talk to them about being a learner myself. So one year I learned to swim, and I had to come in every week and give them an update in assembly as to how I was doing, which kept them entertained for a whole year. Again, setting appropriate levels of challenge that they're happy to accept. You know, this is thinking carefully about what the challenges are, and if they are the right level, and if there are a range of levels for them. Supporting their peer-to-peer chats. As you know, chaps, I guess when you get people to work together, it takes a while for children to understand how you give that great feedback to somebody else. They'll probably initially say things like, you need to do more, or you need to be quicker. But actually, when you start modelling it and supporting those chats, then they get really good at giving each other feedback. Obviously, as adults, giving them great feedback and what you want them to do in the future. And the last top tip, obviously, is be patient. I think with anything like this, and especially after the situation that we've been in, it's going to take time. It's going to take explicit teaching, and it's going to, you know, some days it's going to feel like we've gone 2 steps forward and 3 back or whatever. But I think if people can embed this in their schools, it will make a massive difference to children's mental health and well-being.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that sort of little slide there, just with a few basic things, can make a real big difference. All of those things are they're already happening, but just to give them a little bit more thought, I think is going to be massive, really helpful for everybody. Phil, did you want to jump in or add anything there?
No, I mean, it's been fantastic just listening to the conversations happening. I personally took a lot from it when I first met Sarah on the course back in February, and it was brilliant just to recap on some of those thoughts. And if anything, they're more prominent now heading into September, and a lot of children have gone through so many different experiences, as the example we gave at the start, of children with learning needs, how they've actually flourished compared to those who might be socially confident and who might need that little bit more of a boost. So I think now more than ever, it's so important we offer the right level of support for them going forward. But a massive thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, chap. Let's talk.
Yeah, no, it's been brilliant. And for people listening, people watching, Sarah's put her handles on there, her website, which has got some fantastic resources. I know, Chris, you mentioned that you downloaded some of the PSHE resources. I'm just reading through them. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, I'd echo that as well, Sarah. I would fully recommend anyone who sees this, who's involved in a primary school or any sort of form of education, just to have a quick look, because some of the stuff on there is just so accessible, really easy to use, and it's relevant to everyone, no matter what you're doing. It's really relevant, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people watching who would like to say thank you, Sarah. So a big thank you from us here at Reading FC, and look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Thank you and good luck.
Thank you.